You saw it happen. Everyone saw it happen. Live television, no filter, no warning. Suddenly, cut, gone, silence. And people at home are asking the same question. Why did they pull the plug? Because the truth slipped out. You don't cut a broadcast unless something real is being said. You don't panic unless the words hit exactly where they weren't supposed to. Behind the scenes, the suits were scrambling, phones ringing, lawyers whispering, faces pale. Because once something is said out loud, you can't take it back. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was fear. Fear of confidence, fear of strength, fear of someone who doesn't read from their script, doesn't pause when told to pause, doesn't stop when the sign says commercial break. They thought they were in control until they weren't, and that's what scares them the most. They can debate policy, they can spin headlines, they can shout on panels, but when someone speaks freely, directly, and without permission, the whole system shakes. That's when you see the mask slip. That's when the broadcast goes dark. Ask yourself, if the words were harmless, why silence them? If they were wrong, why not let them play? If there was nothing to hide, why the sudden cut? The answer is simple, and everyone knows it. This wasn't about time, it was about truth. And no matter how fast they reach for the button, you can't cut what people already heard, because once the message is out there, it spreads. And no network, no lawyer, no backroom panic can stop that. The moment the live broadcast was abruptly cut is the clearest signal that something unexpected and powerful had just been said. In television, especially live television, interruptions are not taken lightly. Every second of airtime is planned, rehearsed, ensured, and approved. Producers are trained to ride out awkward moments, controversial statements, and even verbal missteps because cutting away draws far more attention than letting words pass. So when the screen goes dark or the feed suddenly switches, it tells viewers that whatever was spoken crossed an invisible but very real line. That line is not about politeness or tone. It is about impact. Live broadcasts are designed to absorb noise, heated debates, sharp accusations, uncomfortable truths. These happen all the time and are usually managed with delay buttons, disclaimers, or follow-up commentary. An outright cut suggests that the words spoken carried immediate consequences. It suggests that someone, somewhere, recognized in real time that allowing the statement to continue could not be undone later with spin or clarification. In that split second, decision-makers weighed the damage of silencing against the damage of exposure and chose silence. That choice speaks louder than anything that was said on air. Powerful statements create urgency. They force reactions rather than responses. When a broadcast is cut, it is often because those in control believe the words will move faster than they can contain. Once spoken, such words do not remain isolated within a studio. They spread instantly through clips, social media, text messages, and conversations. The fear is not that the audience misunderstood, but that they understood perfectly. Cutting the feed becomes an attempt to slow momentum, even if only briefly, to buy time for damage control. There is also the psychological effect of interruption. Viewers instinctively sense that something significant has occurred. Curiosity intensifies. Suspicion grows. People rewind mentally, trying to recall the exact phrase or implication that triggered the cut. In trying to suppress the moment, the interruption amplifies it. This is why networks are usually reluctant to intervene, unless absolutely necessary. The act of cutting confirms importance. It validates the idea that the statement mattered enough to cause alarm. The power of the moment lies not only in what was said, but in how confidently it was delivered. Words spoken without hesitation, without legal cushioning, and without deference to expected boundaries carry weight. They signal certainty. That certainty is dangerous to systems that rely on ambiguity, interpretation, and controlled messaging. When certainty appears on a live feed, it removes the luxury of gradual response. The reaction must be immediate, and immediacy often looks like panic. In environments where messaging is carefully curated, raw statements are a liability. They cannot be edited, reframed, or contextualized before reaching the public. Cutting a live broadcast is an admission that the usual tools, fact checks, panel discussions, opinion pieces, were not enough to counter what had just been released into the open. It is a last resort move, used when the perceived risk outweighs the reputational cost of censorship. Ultimately, the interruption itself becomes part of the message. It tells viewers that the spoken word struck at something sensitive, something guarded. It transforms a sentence into an event. Even without hearing the full statement, audiences understand that boundaries were crossed and that control was momentarily lost. That loss of control is what gives the moment its power, and why the cut, rather than erasing the impact, confirms that something important was said, something strong enough to make silence seem safer than sound. Silencing a voice in the middle of a live moment is not an act of strength, it is an admission of vulnerability. Confidence invites scrutiny because it believes it can withstand it. Panic, on the other hand, seeks immediacy and erasure. When those in control rush to mute, cut, or interrupt, they reveal that they are not certain of their position. If they were, they would allow the words to stand and then dismantle them calmly afterward. The choice to silence exposes doubt. Doubt in their ability to counter the message, and doubt in their ability to maintain control once the message is fully heard. History shows that confident institutions let challenges breathe. They respond with data, argument, or time. Panic-driven institutions react with force and speed. They shut doors, pull levers, and try to freeze the moment before it grows legs. That instinctive reaction betrays fear, not authority. It suggests that the message spoken has the potential to reshape perception before a counter-narrative can be assembled. Silencing becomes the fastest available defense, not the smartest one. When something is truly wrong, weak, or easily disproven, the safest strategy is exposure. Let it play out. Let the audience hear it, analyze it, and move on. Falsehoods tend to collapse under their own weight when given daylight. Panic intervenes only when daylight is dangerous. The decision to cut away implies that the words spoken might resonate, connect, or linger in ways that are difficult to reverse. That possibility alone is enough to trigger alarm. There is also a performative aspect to silencing that reveals insecurity. Those who are confident do not fear optics. They understand that control is maintained through consistency and composure. Panic sacrifices both. An abrupt interruption looks messy, reactive, and defensive. It invites questions about motive and intent. Yet decision-makers accept this cost because they believe the alternative, letting the speech continue, would be worse. That calculation underscores how threatened they feel by the message itself. Panic thrives in moments where preparation fails. Scripts, guardrails, and expectations exist to minimize risk. When someone steps outside those boundaries and speaks freely, the system is forced to improvise. Improvisation under pressure often exposes true priorities. In these moments, silencing is chosen not because it is ideal, but because it is immediate. It reflects a belief that the audience must be protected from the words, rather than trusted to evaluate them. That lack of trust is another signal of insecurity. The irony is that panic-driven silencing often strengthens the very message it seeks to suppress. Audiences are adept at reading between the lines. They understand that powerful interests do not react this way unless something meaningful is at stake. The interruption reframes the speaker as someone capable of provoking fear, and the silencers as those scrambling to contain it. Even without agreement, viewers recognize imbalance. Panic makes the opposition look rattled. Silencing also collapses the moral high ground. It replaces persuasion with control. Instead of saying, "This is wrong and here's why," it says, "This cannot be heard." That shift changes the conversation entirely. The focus moves away from the content of the message and toward the act of suppression itself. Panic, in trying to end a conversation, unintentionally starts a bigger one about power, fear, and who decides what is allowed to be said. In the end, panic is revealed not by words, but by actions taken under pressure. Calm confidence delays, responds, and explains. Panic interrupts, silences, and hopes the moment passes. When a voice is cut mid-sentence, it is not strength asserting itself, it is uncertainty flinching, and audiences, whether they agree with the message or not, instinctively recognize the difference. Unscripted speech represents a direct challenge to systems built on predictability and control. In environments where messaging is carefully managed, every word is expected to serve a purpose, align with approved narratives, and fit within defined boundaries. Scripts exist not just to guide speakers, but to protect institutions from uncertainty. When someone abandons the script, they remove that layer of protection. What remains is raw, unfiltered communication, and that is inherently disruptive to structures that rely on moderation, framing, and gradual disclosure. Control depends on anticipation. When decision-makers know what will be said next, they can prepare responses, craft counterpoints, and soften impact through context. Unscripted speech eliminates that advantage. It introduces spontaneity, which cannot be easily managed in real time. A single sentence spoken freely can undo hours of preparation, weeks of messaging, or even years of carefully constructed perception. This is why unscripted moments are treated as liabilities rather than expressions of authenticity within controlled environments. There is also an asymmetry in unscripted speech that makes it especially threatening. Systems speak collectively, unscripted speakers speak individually. Institutions require consensus, approvals, and alignment before responding. An individual speaking freely needs none of that. The speed difference is critical. A spontaneous remark can travel faster than any coordinated response, reaching audiences before filters or interpretations can be applied. That speed creates imbalance, and imbalance weakens control. Unscripted speech also shifts power toward the audience. When messages are scripted, audiences are guided on how to interpret them. Tone, pacing, and framing are all designed to lead perception. Free speech disrupts that guidance. It forces listeners to interpret meaning on their own, drawing conclusions without instruction. That autonomy is dangerous to systems that depend on directing thought rather than merely informing it. Once audiences feel trusted to judge for themselves, the authority of the script diminishes. Another threat lies in authenticity. Unscripted words often sound more genuine even when controversial. People tend to associate spontaneity with honesty, whether justified or not. That perception alone gives unscripted speech influence. Systems built on managed messaging struggle to compete with the emotional impact of words that feel unrehearsed and personal. Authenticity does not require agreement to be effective. It only requires credibility, and credibility is harder to challenge than policy. Unscripted speech also resists compartmentalization. Scripts are designed to keep topics contained, preventing spillover into sensitive areas. ideas. When someone speaks freely, they may connect dots that were meant to remain separate. They may reference ideas, implications, or consequences that disrupt the preferred structure of discussion. This collapsing of boundaries exposes relationships and tensions that scripted dialogue works to keep hidden. Once those connections are spoken aloud, they cannot be easily reseparated. Control systems rely heavily on escalation management. They assume issues will unfold in stages, allowing time for adjustment. Unscripted speech ignores that pacing. It escalates instantly, often compressing what would normally be a prolonged debate into a single moment. That compression leaves little room for mitigation. It forces immediate reckoning, which is precisely what controlled systems seek to avoid. Finally, unscripted speech challenges the idea of permission. Scripts imply that speech is allowed because it has been approved. Speaking freely rejects that premise. It asserts that authority to speak does not come from endorsement, but from presence. That assertion undermines hierarchical control. It reminds audiences that speech can exist outside official channels, and that influence does not always flow from the top down. This is why unscripted speech is perceived as dangerous. It disrupts timing, bypasses filters, empowers audiences, and weakens hierarchical authority, all at once. For systems that depend on control, predictability, and managed narratives, that combination is not merely uncomfortable. It is destabilizing. Behind-the-scenes reactions often reveal more than what happens on camera, and in moments like this, those unseen responses tell a story of urgency and fear. When a situation is truly under control, reactions are measured, deliberate, and procedural. When panic sets in, however, everything becomes fast, fragmented, and instinctive. The image of lawyers, executives, and advisors scrambling is not dramatic embellishment. It is the natural outcome of a system suddenly confronted with risk it did not anticipate and does not immediately know how to contain. Legal teams exist to manage exposure, not emotion. Their role is to assess risk, minimize liability, and ensure compliance before problems escalate. When they are forced into rapid, reactive mode, it means the situation has already moved beyond normal safeguards. Words spoken publicly, especially in a live setting, cannot be retracted or edited. Lawyers understand this better than anyone. Their panic is rooted in the realization that potential consequences are now unfolding in real time without the benefit of review, preparation, or strategic framing. Executives react similarly, though their fear is often reputational rather than legal. Brands and networks are built on trust, predictability, and audience loyalty. A single uncontrolled moment threatens all three. When executives scramble, it is because they recognize that damage may already be in progress, damage that could affect advertisers, partners, shareholders, and long-term credibility. Their concern is not merely about what was said, but about how it will be perceived, shared, and interpreted once it leaves the controlled environment of the broadcast. Panic behind the scenes also reflects a sudden loss of hierarchy. In well-managed situations, authority flows clearly. Decisions are made through established channels with defined roles and responsibilities. In moments of crisis, that structure breaks down. People speak over one another. Phones light up. Instructions conflict. The urgency to act overrides protocol. This breakdown is itself a sign that the event was not anticipated and that contingency plans, if they existed at all, were insufficient. Another driver of panic is uncertainty. Those reacting may not even fully understand the scope of the problem yet. They only know that something dangerous may have occurred. This lack of clarity intensifies fear. Without knowing exactly how the public will respond, decision-makers assume the worst. They imagine headlines, legal filings, regulatory scrutiny, and social backlash all at once. The mind races ahead of the facts, and panic fills the gap where information should be. Behind-the-scenes panic also exposes misalignment between preparation and reality. Extensive planning goes into live appearances, talking points, boundaries, and risk assessments. When those preparations fail, it suggests a false sense of security preceded the moment. The scramble that follows is not just about the immediate issue. It is also about confronting the failure of the system that was supposed to prevent it. That realization compounds stress and urgency. Importantly, this panic is rarely coordinated. While the public may imagine a single decisive hand pulling strings, the reality is often chaotic. Legal teams focus on liability, executives on optics, producers on logistics, and public relations on narrative, all simultaneously, often with conflicting priorities. The lack of a unified response amplifies the sense of crisis. Each group reacts to its own perceived threat, creating a flurry of activity that looks and feels like alarm. This frantic response contrasts sharply with how truly controlled situations are handled. When outcomes are predictable, reactions are slow and deliberate. Statements are drafted, reviewed, and released on schedule. When panic erupts, it is because time has collapsed. There is no longer room for polish, only for damage limitation. That collapse is telling. It signals that those behind the scenes believe the words spoken have already changed the trajectory of events. In that sense, the panic itself becomes evidence. It reveals that the moment mattered enough to trigger fear among those whose job is to avoid exactly this kind of exposure. Their reaction confirms that something significant occurred, something that escaped containment and forced them into a defensive posture they would have preferred never to assume. Once words are heard, they take on a life of their own, beyond the reach of buttons, switches, or sudden silence. Sound can be cut, screens can go dark, but understanding cannot be reversed. The moment a message lands with an audience, it becomes memory, interpretation, and conversation. That transformation is irreversible. Attempts to erase it only highlight how permanent it already is. This is why the idea of control through interruption is ultimately an illusion. Human communication does not end when a broadcast ends. It multiplies. People repeat what they heard, paraphrase it, debate it, and speculate about what followed. Even incomplete information fills the gap through discussion. In many cases, not hearing the full statement makes it more powerful, not less. The mind naturally tries to complete unfinished thoughts. Silence invites imagination, and imagination spreads faster than clarity. By cutting a message short, those in control surrender the narrative to the audience. In the modern media environment, information does not stay contained within its original platform. A single moment is clipped, shared, dissected, and reinterpreted across countless spaces. The initial audience becomes a network of secondary messengers. Each retelling carries the core idea forward, even if the exact wording changes. What survives is not the transcript, but the impact. Once that impact exists, it cannot be recalled or neutralized by retroactive explanation. Silencing also carries symbolic meaning. It communicates that the message was important enough to stop. That signal alone validates the moment in the minds of many observers. People may disagree with the content, but they recognize the implication. Something was said that challenged boundaries. That recognition embeds itself into perception. The act of suppression becomes inseparable from the message itself, reinforcing its significance rather than diminishing it. There is also a psychological resistance to erasure. People instinctively distrust efforts to remove information after it has been presented. They question motives and assume intent. The harder the suppression, the stronger the suspicion that the message held weight. This reaction is not ideological, it is human. When access is denied, curiosity intensifies. Silence does not close minds, it opens them. Words once spoken also anchor themselves emotionally. Tone, confidence, and timing matter as much as content. An audience remembers how something felt, even if details blur. That emotional memory persists long after the technical interruption. It influences how future information is received and evaluated. No correction or clarification can fully overwrite that first impression. Emotional truth, once registered, resists revision. Efforts to contain a message after the fact often reveal a misunderstanding of how influence works. Influence does not rely solely on continuous exposure, it relies on resonance. A single statement can resonate long after it is cut off if it connects to existing beliefs, frustrations, or questions. Once resonance occurs, repetition is unnecessary. The idea embeds itself and resurfaces whenever related topics arise. In trying to erase a moment, institutions often underestimate the audience's role. People are not passive recipients, they are interpreters and participants. They compare notes, challenge official explanations, and form independent conclusions. When a message disappears abruptly, audiences do not forget it, they interrogate it. That interrogation keeps the message alive far longer than uninterrupted airtime might have. Ultimately, silence is not absence, it is presence of a different kind. It draws attention to what is missing and why. The attempt to cut, mute, or remove a message acknowledges its power by reacting to it. Control depends on prevention, not reaction. Once reaction is necessary, the moment has already escaped. What was heard remains heard, reshaped and carried forward by those who received it, beyond the reach of any switch meant to stop it.